You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Just Japan podcast, everything you want to know about Japan. It's episode 220, and it's me, Kevin O'Shea, back with another episode. And in this one, I'm chatting with Joseph Fowler, TV's own Joseph Fowler. If you're someone who uses Twitter and you follow the Japan Gaijin Twitter scene, you may know who he is. If you're someone who listens to the podcast, Ishikawa Samatasi, you definitely know who he is. Joe is a British expat who has been living in Japan for some time, and he's got a very entertaining podcast called Ishikawa Samatasi, and it was finally great to get him on the podcast. He's been on the list for a long time. I've been definitely thinking about having him come on the podcast, but on the most recent episode of Ishikawa Samatasi, he put out a bit of a not so subtle call for me to get him on the show, and I listened. So, again, we have a fantastic conversation, a lot of fun. So what I'm going to do right now, we're going to get into that in a few moments. And then at the end of the episode, I'll kind of talk about myself, let you know what I'm up to, some updates like that. But one thing I do want to say just before we do get into the episode is to go over and follow the Facebook page for the Just Japan podcast, facebook.com/justjapanstuff. There's a great active community over there, and I am very active in posting over there videos, photos, just chatting, thoughts, all kinds of things. Occasionally I do live streams, and that's facebook.com/justjapanstuff. So go check that out. Go follow me there. And hey, listen to my conversation with Joe Fowler, Kumayama100 on Twitter, the host of the Ishikawa Samatasi podcast. All right, we're back with another episode of the Just Japan podcast. It's me, Kevin, and this time I'm back with a brand new guest, the famed Joseph Fowler. Hey, how you doing?
Hello, the famed,
yes, the TV's
infamous
Joseph Fowler. The TV's Joseph Fowler, is that right?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah,
that's right. That's what you're known as on Twitter at the moment, anyway. Or I mean X, whatever that is.
Yeah. I think X is probably accurate when it comes to my TV career, but I'm going to stick to that moniker for as long as I can.
Nice. It's super cool having you on the podcast. Just before we hit record, everyone, I was saying that Joseph he's been on the list of people I've wanted to have on the podcast for quite some time. And, I was listening to the latest episode of Ishikawa Samatasi, and, kind of a call was put out.
My shameless plea.
Shameless plea. And I rose to the occasion of accepting that shameless plea. And it's really awesome to have you here for sure, because I definitely I enjoy listening to your podcast. I enjoyed it when that other guy was on it, and I still enjoy it now.
He's long gone. I wouldn't waste too much time thinking about him.
Yeah. Well, he may listen to this. Who knows? He actually had a new episode out recently, just this past weekend, which was great to hear. That other guy. We'll talk about that other guy later on, maybe. But
okay.
So of course, you're based in Japan, and where are you right now, anyway? Exactly, for those who are listening.
Well, I'm in my spare room in an apartment in Nonoichi.
Okay.
Right next to Kanazawa in Ishikawa.
Okay.
On the left of Japan. It's very hard to say exactly where in Japan, because I think they consider this the north of Japan. But I've lived in the north of Japan in Hokkaido, and this is not the north of Japan in my mind. It's the never eat shredded wheat. It's the west.
Never sure. I'm a grade 2 teacher, and I taught my students in the last month about what a compass rose is, and they were, what was it? Never eat wet. There's a never eat soggy something.
Waffles?
That was it, I think. Never eat soggy waffles. That's what my kids were saying. Yeah, never soggy something. Yeah. So yeah, I actually so you're not in one of those over touristed areas we keep hearing so much about in all the news.
Not yet, but Kanazawa is becoming more popular, probably as a result of Ishikawa Summit to see. But
Absolutely.
I don't want to blow my own trumpet on that one just yet. But yeah,
I think
there's
that's
definitely.
probably really responsible. The podcast is responsible for the influx of tourists recently, I think.
I should think so. Yeah. Well, at least if about 40 people turn up, maybe. But but yeah, there is an increasing number of tourists, but it's not reaching Kyoto levels just yet.
Yeah. Probably not. I actually visited Kanazawa for the first time back in 2020. And when the borders had been closed and we were in Japan at the time for about a year, I was working in China. And when the poo started hitting the fan in China, we flew to Japan. And then the borders closed in China, the borders closed in Japan, and we hung out in Japan for almost a year in Osaka.
Nice.
And we went up to Kanazawa as we were on our way to Shirakawa-go in Gifu. And that was interesting because talk about not being over touristed at that point. That was a really cool experience of going to these over touristed places and having them all to ourselves. It was pretty neat.
Yeah. Actually, I went to Kyoto during that time. Not on a holiday. I was there working. But it was the same deal. It was like empty. It was great.
It was neat, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember walking up to Kimiyazadera up that big main street, that thoroughfare, and it's just like empty. And we got up there and got all those cliched, iconic photos with no one around. It was pretty neat, pretty remarkable.
No Photoshop necessary.
Exactly. So hey, whenever I bring someone on the podcast, I mean, there you are in Ishikawa. And we always want to know. It's always fascinating to find out how the heck people got to Japan. We all have different stories. Some are kind of standard, came to teach, and then others are a little bit more, not so average, but they're all interesting. So how did you find yourself in Japan?
Well, this is my second time living in Japan.
Okay.
And the first time was back in 2005. I came for a year, and I did a master's degree, an MSc in occupational psychology, right after my undergraduate degree.
Okay.
Back in England. I'm from England, by the way, in case anyone wasn't aware of that. From my voice, and I
thought you were in New York.
Yeah, well, I could try to be if you wanted me to be, but it's quite difficult to keep up the accent for the whole show. Park the car. No, that's Boston, isn't it? Anyway, I had this directory of postgraduate jobs. So it was like to help new students who just qualified, just graduated, to find a job. They provided you with a literal booklet about an inch thick, just full of companies all around the world. And I had a slight mind to go to Canada, which you'll be pleased to hear. So, I was sort of thinking Canada looks good. It's got big trees and stuff.
Yeah.
So, there was mainly the big trees and the big mountains that I was intrigued by. Anyway, I fired my CV off to almost every company in the directory without really paying attention.
Yeah.
And I got two replies. One said no, thank you, and one said come for an interview. And that was for Nova.
Okay, yeah.
Japan. And I remember thinking, what? I don't remember applying for a job in Japan. So I really wasn't concentrating whatsoever when I was applying for jobs. Had no intention of going to Japan, no particular interest in going to Japan.
You assumed it was Nova Scotia in Canada,
Nova Scotia, yeah, it must be. Yeah. Don't they have Labradors there as well?
They do, cool. Yeah, and Labradoodles. They're all there.
Yeah. So yeah, I was like, oh, okay, I'll go for the interview in London. It's a free trip to London. They paid for my travel, so I went to London, went to the interview, and I remember sitting in the waiting area before the interview, looking through some brochures. I had no idea about Japan, just beyond what the average person has.
Mhm.
And apart from what I covered in my latest episode of Ishikawa Summer to See, which you'll have to listen to find out what that is. Um, and there was this one that said Hokkaido. And so I was like, oh, okay. There's snow on the front of this. I like snow. Big fan of snow. I remember looking through it. And then I went in for the interview and they said, if you came to Japan, where would you like to live? And I went, Hokkaido? I'd only just heard of it like 2 minutes earlier. And they were like, what? What?
Have we got a place
Tokyo?
for you?
Yeah, exactly. I think they were shocked that I didn't say. I think everyone just says Tokyo, and they just got a bit taken aback. So I had Tokyo as my second choice, I think. So anyway, I got the job, and couldn't. I gave myself a challenge to find another job in England before I had to pay for my flight. I didn't get one, and so I went to Japan, and that was how I ended up in Japan. So not a lick of
teaching for
Japanese.
Nova. Wow.
Teaching at Nova, yeah.
That was I arrived in Japan in 2008, early 2008, and that was the previous year is when I think the big Nova crash was, because I remember it was kind of on international news, because all of a sudden there was like 7 or 8,000 foreign teachers who were just left hanging, and it's really interesting that when I got to Japan, I met a lot of people who had worked at Nova, and they all had incredible horror stories. People were being brought in as the ship was sinking, like literally showing up, and then to here's the apartment that you're supposed to stay in, and then like the next day the landlord like kicking them out and stuff, and people
that
saying
happened to my friend.
Yeah, there were like people. The Nova was garnishing rent from their paychecks, but actually not paying the rent to various landlords. I was hearing about that. I heard that case many times. So landlords are kicking them out, saying you haven't paid rent in 6 months, and they're like, "What? Rent's deducted from my paycheck for every month for the last 6 months."
Wow.
Yeah. So it was quite a wow. So how long were you with? How long were you there that first stint?
1 year exactly.
Okay.
So I was there 2005 to 2006. I was offered another contract at the time, and I was really loving living in Japan. Was actually having a great time, and that was the reason I decided to go home. Which sounds a bit perverse, but it's not the most perverse thing I've said. But the reason I went home, my brother just had a baby. His partner just had a baby. And I wanted to be there to be a good uncle. And because I was having such a great time, I thought, right, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. I don't want this to go sour. I don't want to end up hating Japan or having a bad time.
Okay.
Like I'd heard some people doing at that time. So I bailed. I was like, right, I'm having a great time. I'm enjoying it. I've had a good experience. I'm going home. And so I went home.
Like when a TV sitcom ends on a high note.
Exactly.
But the ratings are so great. Why did they end? Well, we wanted to end on a high note.
Exactly. And here I am back. And I'm here plugging away with some more series. And it's, it's still good. It's still good.
It's okay. Actors get to, be recast in other series. And the second time, now you're back and you're not working for Nova. And that's a good thing. So
that is a good thing.
Yeah. Wow. So how did you get back that second time? How did
So I went back to Newcastle, my hometown, and I worked in my 1 year of teaching at Nova was deemed enough teaching qualifications to get a job as maternity cover at my old high school.
Oh, really? Okay.
I know, crazy. And I was teaching A-level psychology, which is 16 to 18-year-olds. It's kind of like college age. So I'm 25 years old, 26 years old, totally unqualified teacher. And I got a job in actually what is a very good high school. It's free. It's a comprehensive, but a very, very good one, teaching psychology. I did that for 2 years. And then I left that job and got a job teaching at Newcastle University,
Okay.
teaching English to international students. So I was teaching EAP, academic English,
Okay.
to PhD master's students, mostly with some undergraduate students as well. And that was great. I mean, the students were great. They came from all around the world, from South America to the Middle East to Japan, China, Russia, all across Europe. Anywhere that doesn't speak English as a first language, I've taught students from there for sure.
Wow.
And I worked there for 10 years. And
wow, okay.
towards the end of my time, and actually while I was there, I got a girlfriend who was Japanese. I met my wife, and I'm not saying that she was definitely one of my students, but I'm also not saying that she wasn't.
You're not
but
saying
she is
anything, and I'm not reading between any lines.
Don't
So
read
you
between
met?
any lines.
Yeah.
And she got really good grades, but that was based purely on her excellent English ability. Actually, she was doing a preparatory, like a pre-master's English course,
Okay.
and she'd already been accepted onto the course, so it was a voluntary thing. I kind of taught getting the international students up to speed with the English university academic writing system. All very boring. So yeah, I met her, and at some point I decided I'd quite like to come back to Japan with her. So I applied for the job that I have now, but they said, you sound great, but you don't have a master's in the required field, which is TESOL or academic or applied linguistics.
Okay.
So I had to do another master's degree. I did it while I was working full time. I did another master's degree. Yeah, part time. So in between teaching lectures, I attended lectures, and yeah, it was a tough couple of years. I was slogging it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because I'd spent the previous kind of 7 or 8 years teaching how to write academic essays, I absolutely aced it. Nothing to do with my, academic ability. It was all to do with knowing how to write something to get a good grade.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's
then,
really cool. I mean, I was gonna say like I years ago, I think when my kids were very young, like young toddler and infant, I started a master's program part time while working full time, and that didn't last long. I believe I got
yeah,
through just a couple of courses, and then I was like, you know what? We'll put that on the shelf for now. This is not the time to do it. Yeah.
no. I think if you'd thrown a toddler and a little one into the mix at that point, I would not have survived.
No.
So yeah, so I got the required masters. I did it in cross-cultural communication and applied linguistics,
Okay.
and reapplied and got the job. And so actually, I came back over and I worked with the previous co-host of Ishikawa Summer to See,
Yes.
he who shall not be named.
He shall not be named. Yes, with civets in his
He
loquat
will.
tree. Yes.
Exactly.
He with civets in
That
the
guy
tree.
the singing gardener.
The singing gardener.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I ended up back over here in Kanazawa.
Awesome. And okay, so for those who are listening who may not know, believe it or not, about your podcast,
No.
let's get into this. So, that's the reason why I know of Joseph is because of this podcast. So I was listening to the Bean Pod for some time, and
Never heard of it.
You'd been in, it's something to do with a singing gardener. Yeah, but I'm not sure how I came across it. Just on X, I guess, on a Twitter post, I came across Ishikawa Summit to See and added it to my extensive library collection of podcasts on my phone. So I don't have enough lifetimes to ever listen to all of the podcasts I subscribe to. So a lot of times I just kind of dip my toes in here and there. So I'd listen to a few episodes. So how did that podcast, or first of all, tell us about your podcast and how it started and what you're doing with it now. So folks, you all out there listening, you want Japan content. Here's some more Japan content for you. So tell us.
Yeah. It was just a kind of, I guess, okay, I am going to name him Casey of the Bean Pod.
That's out.
There you go.
There you go, Casey.
He
Who has been on this podcast before? He has been on the podcast.
He has long ago.
Long ago, yes.
He and I are friends at work, and we both have an interest in ourselves. Massive narcissists, basically.
That's what all of us podcasters are.
Exactly. You put a couple of narcissists together and you get a podcast. There you go.
Exactly.
So we decided to start one. He used to have a podcast a while before, another podcast with another of my co-hosts on a different podcast, the J-Pops, which I recently joined, and then I don't know if it was my influence, but that seems to have gone into hiatus. But I'll tell you more about that in a bit if you're interested. But Ishikawa Summer to See, I think we just wanted to record a podcast. I did the 100th episode of the Bean Pod with Casey at his house. I went there, we ate pizza, we drank too much whiskey, and I think it was probably the only really truly risque episode of the Bean Pod that has been to date. That we went a little bit wild on that one, and we had fun, and we said, hey, let's do this. Let's do a podcast together. And so we decided just to start doing it, and really very little planning goes into it. We have had different segments over the years that we've been doing it. We read poetry. Casey wasn't quite into the poetry as much as I was, so it turned into just me doing poetry. We have sang songs together on there in the past, I think. And we talked about our areas, each other's areas. So I would talk about Massachusetts, look for stories in the news, and he would look at Newcastle. That was a lot of fun. But also, it's kind of mainly talking about what's going on in our lives and sort of life in Ishikawa generally. The reason it's called Summit to See, if you're wondering, is it's an incredibly clever play on words that nobody outside my hometown will understand.
Okay.
So, like many parts of Japan, Ishikawa is close to the sea, but also close to mountains. So you got the Hakusan mountain range, and you can see both from either. So if you're up in the mountains, you can see the sea. If you're at the sea, you can see the mountains. So Summit to See was a kind of a description of the topography, geology of Ishikawa. But also, where I come from, summit is a way of saying something.
Oh, okay.
So summit. And summit to see, something to see. So
there you go.
A slight... Yeah, but,
Some Newcastle English.
Geordie. Yeah, it's a bit Geordie.
Geordie, okay.
That's Newcastle English, yeah.
I've heard that. I've heard that before. Years ago, I saw a movie called Goal.
Yes. Classic.
And the American football player gets there, and they refer to
Santiago
Newcastle as Geordies. Yeah, Santiago. Yep. That's right. That's right. I believe Alan Shearer was in there, and the whole the whole crew back in the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was a great movie. I mean, it was a terrible movie, a really shockingly bad movie, but it's all about Newcastle United, so it makes it a great movie.
Nice. But now the podcast is a solo journey now.
Yeah, well, Casey got promoted and decided that he no longer wanted to be associated with the sort of drunken debauchery that goes on in Ishikawa Summit to See. We did tend to enjoy imbibing a few strong beers while we chatted. And usually, that led to a deterioration in the quality of the podcast towards the end of it. I think he was a little bit worried that some of the higher ups might tune in inadvertently. I don't know how that would happen, but yeah. So he decided to step back from the irresponsible nature of the podcast and sort of leave me to hanging out to dry.
And now you're
I'm
hanging,
not worried about that.
and episodes are coming out. And how are you finding it now? I mean, obviously, from what I see on X, you've definitely got some loyal listeners who are enjoying the episodes. I see people talking about it in our little kind of Twitter X world. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely changed in tone. Obviously, Casey was bringing that down, and that must have been the factor. So it's a slightly slightly different tone, perhaps a bit more family friendly to some extent. But it's sort of mainly what's going on in my life, which is a lot generally. And I still read a poem, and I tried to talk a little bit about my experiences in Japan, going back over the years.
Yeah, I mean, like when I listen to the episodes, you certainly are busy, and I mean, I would just want to touch on a couple of those things. So
Yeah, sure.
you've become a father. So and in Japan, and it's I mean, I had both of my kids in Japan, and I never had children in Canada where I'm from, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. I suppose the way I kind of fathered was more maybe the way a Japanese parent would, or the way I raised kids, because we went to classes and learned things beforehand and afterwards, and we get the advice from, my mother-in-law and my wife's aunts and all these different folks and influences, and then her big band of Mama Tomo. And it was, I think everything I learned about raising children was definitely very Japanese-y. How have you been finding the parenting experience? Sleep
It's
deprived, I'm
tiring.
sure.
Yeah, it's tiring, and all of that stuff. But I've absolutely loved it. I've loved every minute of it. Even being 2:30 in the morning, standing, cradling a baby, trying to get him to go back to sleep. Even those moments, I don't mind, because I look down and I see this, like, the cutest thing in the world, and I just think, this is great. Look what I've made here. So I'm thoroughly enjoying being a dad. I can't get enough of it.
And
I can't
ironically
get
enough,
enough of it. I think
I was thinking, ironically enough, as I am kind of turning my head to my left and kind of giggling, because through two sets of closed doors, I can hear my teenage son, a string of profanities coming from his mouth as he's playing Fortnite online. And he's
okay.
cursing and swearing at whoever is like his teammates, who are like, "They never helping me," and it's like, oh wow, he's pretty adept at the profanities. But it's funny. I mean, I guess I appreciate that in a different way. But yeah. So I a few episodes ago of Ishikawa Summit to See, I heard that amazing story of you rescuing your daughter's, was it a rabbit, stuffed rabbit? She had dropped it, and you had to go somewhere. Like, was it a park?
I had to go
A reception center or something like that?
It's down by the the Saigawa River. There's a park, and there's actually a children's center down there. This is I think that was Kuro-chan, which is her beloved little bunny. Not actually it's not what's the word? I've lost the word where they stuff a dead animal. What's that called? I've lost the word. Anyway, it was never a live rabbit.
Yes, a stuffed animal, a plushie, a stuffy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She must have dropped it at the park. So I had to go before band practice. I drove down there, and there was a little old parking attendant guy in his office. So I went up and asked him, and my Japanese is limited, so I just said, Musume no Kuro-chan wa surapetta, or something like that. And he went, Kuro-chan, Kuro-chan. I said, Kurosagi, yes, yes. Okay, okay. And he went and got it. And sure enough, someone had handed it in. She was
Oh,
so
Japan.
happy.
Oh, Japan. Oh, Japan. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
I've had those. I can remember my son dropping a towel one time somewhere, and he realized, and he had this massive meltdown about this little towel with like little cute sushi characters on it. I remember getting my bicycle and off I went, and I spent probably a good 3 hours like all over my neighborhood, and then finally I saw it. There it was, and I remember I brought it home, and it
Oh,
was like this triumphant moment as I walked in the door with this little
yeah.
sushi towel, and he was just like he was crying because he was so happy. It was just like, there we go. But these
It's
are
a
the
great
things.
moment.
These are the
Yeah.
great moments we have as fathers of young children. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she's. I mean, I do post pictures of her on Twitter quite a bit.
mhm.
I'm sorry. I'm going to persistently call it Twitter.
Me
I
too. Me
refuse
too. I
I
hate calling
refuse
it
to call it.
X. Okay, this is Twitter. That's
And it's probably not a good idea to share so many pictures of her, I mean, on such a public forum, but she's just too cute. You know, I have to share it with the world.
yeah,
My
yeah,
my pride, my
yeah.
pride and joy.
Absolutely. That's so cool. And I mean, and I've been following the trials and tribulations of your house hunting. So that's something that's
Mm,
really interesting. On the last episode of the Just Japan podcast, I had on Danny and Evan Benton from Benton Homestead, and they talked all about buying Akia and fixing up these old houses, which is something that's
mm,
all the rage now
mm.
across. Not maybe I don't know if it's all the rage, but you hear a lot about it. There are a lot of old houses to be had for a penny or two. But mind you, you're gonna
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
put a lot more than a penny or two into them to live in them.
Oh
But
yeah.
maybe that's not what you're quite looking for. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the house hunting because that's something that I didn't go through when I was living in Japan. But
Mm,
I do plan to. My goal is to buy a house within the next few years in Japan. I might not be working in Japan, but I do want to buy a property. So tell us
mm.
how that's going.
Well, it's funny you should ask because we're imminently waiting for the response to an offer we made on a house. The house we so we're also looking not actually looking for an old house at all. We were looking for any viable property,
Hmm.
probably used as they call them in Japan, a second-hand house, which is
Yeah,
kind of interesting. We just call them houses,
yeah. There's just
but
houses in Canada too.
yeah, but I guess we also don't have the culture of knocking a house down and then building up on the land. You know, we tend to keep them. I have a flat in Newcastle, which is by now in a building that must, I think it's around 130 years old,
Hmm.
and it's going nowhere. It's solid, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But here, you know, 30 years old, and that's considered an old house.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we were just looking for anything viable. And my stipulations on a house are a little bit of space and a nice view. I like looking out the window and seeing mountains or a river or something
Yeah,
nice rather than just the wall of another house, which
yeah, yeah.
makes me feel a little claustrophobic. I grew up in the countryside,
Hmm.
you know, and that's just my aesthetic is to have that kind of view.
Hmm.
And for my wife, it's for Gorgonella, it's proximity to a train station so she can get to work, and foremost, I think in well, almost foremost is earthquake proofedness.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, especially with the recent events in Ishikawa,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
big earthquake. So we found we found a house which is actually 57 years old,
Oh, okay.
quite old, built in 1967, but it's in pretty good nick. We have I alluded to band practice earlier. I play in a jazz orchestra here in Ishikawa, in Kanazawa. And I play trombone, and the first trombone player is also a carpenter.
Okay.
And so he's been going on the journey with us. We've had several disappointments and different houses that we liked the look of. We've made offers, had them rejected, and each time he's come and given the house a thorough inspection, which he's done for this one, and he thinks it's okay. So
Okay.
he's happy, and if he's happy, I'm happy. Yeah. So yeah, we wait. The offer was made. The estate agent seemed positive, and the owner was just having a family meeting today.
Okay.
And I was expecting to actually have had news before before recording, but nothing yet. So
Okay.
still a little nervous.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
wait.
yeah. That would be. Oh my gosh. Well, fingers crossed for you. Hopefully that will go well. And it's great that you're bringing a carpenter with you on these excursions, because that's one thing that I think about. Obviously you're going to the places and checking. One of the interesting things I was talking about in the last episode with the Bentons was how many, people who are not based in Japan buy things sight unseen, which is,
Yeah.
And I came across a vlog of some woman, I'm not sure where she was from, maybe Australia, maybe New Zealand, and she had bought an old Akia sight unseen, and then she came to Japan, and then it was like problem after problem after problem after problem. Nightmare stuff
Yeah.
too. She was like, there was like a water leak in the basement, but then realized that all the pipes were buried under cement.
Ooh.
So like,
Yeah, that's going to be expensive.
they're like, we're gonna have to actually dig up all of this cement. It was like a crawl space too. We'll have to somehow like jackhammer out all this cement in your crawl space just to figure out where the leak might be. And it was just like, oh
Yeah.
my God. Like,
Yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, I would certainly recommend viewing a property before buying it if you can.
yes.
I'm not a property expert, but that's probably sort of property 101.
Yeah, my background as a primary school teacher, I would also suggest the same. It's kind of common sense 101.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean the things that if you are looking to buy a house and you wanted some advice from somebody who's been through the mill a few times over here, it's tricky because if there's somewhere good on the market, it's a very slow market unless something good comes up.
Okay.
So there are properties that have been on for a year or more, and you have to question why that is, first of all. And then if something really, really nice comes on, it's gone. It's like it'll come on in the morning, and then by the end of that day or the next day, 3 or 4 people will have looked at it and someone will have made an offer.
Okay.
So you have to be across all of the sort of aggravators, like the Sumo.
Okay. Yeah.
I forget the other one that aggregate all of the estate agents.
Yeah.
And you really have to be on that every day, twice a day, 3 times a day, just to know when the good one comes up, and go and look at it as soon as you possibly can, because it will be snapped up. That's what we did with this one, actually. The one that we are currently maybe going to buy.
Yeah.
It was actually on the market for about a month, but because the full size of the property hadn't been registered, it was listed as 84 square meters. But the price was not the price of an 84 square meter house, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you exactly what the price was, but I think a lot of people just went past it like, no, I'm not paying that much for 85 square meters.
Yeah, because that's a tiny 84 or 85 square meters to be a tiny house.
Tiny house, yeah, exactly. A tiny house.
Yeah.
And I think people put a parameter in their search engine. It has to be 120 meters plus kind of thing.
Yeah.
My wife found it actually, and when you look at the pictures, it's clearly not 84 square meters because the kitchen's 84 square meters. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's definitely not that size.
Yeah, yeah.
So we went to have a look, and yeah, it's great. It's a great house, and so we immediately made it known that we were interested. And he actually kindly, the estate agent, gave us first dibs at that point. He said, "Right, I'm not going to show anyone else the house. If you are seriously interested, I'll keep it for you." And he did, and he kept his word. And we're just waiting to find out if it's successful or not.
Fingers crossed, toes crossed.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Wow.
Be brave. Be
I'm
brave
sure
in
we'll
your
hear all
searching.
about it. I'm sure, hopefully, maybe we'll hear about it on Gaijin Twitter, which is what I want to go to the next thing I want to ask you about. I'm not sure how much of the Just Japan podcast you'll listen to, but a couple of episodes ago,
I've listened to a few episodes.
okay,
Yeah,
I had Kurt
I'm the same
Bell,
as you.
I had Kurt Bell on, and Kurt Bell,
yes.
Softy Papa, who back in the early days of YouTube content creators in Japan, he was one of the originals actually, and he developed quite a loyal following on YouTube with his roamings through the forest of Shizuoka and whatnot. And in that episode, he talked about how he had followed me, and I had kind of disappeared from YouTube and disappeared from different places, and then he put it like he discovered that Kevin had another girlfriend. And that girlfriend was Gaijin Twitter. That I've been just over on Twitter for years and years and years. And even though I left Japan quite some time ago, for work reasons, I've still always have my toes in the kind of Japan kind of Twitter scene, because I have the most fun in that place, that space. And I just find these are the coolest people to interact with,
Yeah.
So, what I'm curious about that term Gaijin Twitter, but how did you first come across, were you a longtime Twitter user? Did you just kind of stumble across it? Did you find it through Casey? How did you get involved with the community, the rather entertaining community that is Gaijin Twitter?
Actually, it was the other way around. I've been on Twitter for quite a while, and I think Casey was on, but he wasn't really active.
Okay.
I had a lot more, and not that it's a competition, I had a lot more followers than he did. And in the early days, I was kind of more interested in the football stuff, Newcastle United stuff, and I, interacted with fellow fans. And I started Twitter long before I came to Japan, when I was in England.
Okay.
And so it was kind of mostly football and music type stuff that I interacted with, and followed some celebrities and stuff like that. I used to get onto the radio quite a lot, actually, in England at the BBC.
Okay.
BBC Radio, because I used to listen to. I'm a big funk and soul guy.
Nice.
Funk and soul music, and so I used to know. I don't know. I have a radio brain. I knew exactly what to say to get to the top of the list of things, and so I quite often was invited on to the radio, and I was interviewed by the presenters on several occasions on national radio in England, and also since I've been in Japan. Not that I'm not showing off about that in any way, but it's just I just knew what to say to get noticed. And so that's where Twitter sort of began for me. And then coming to Japan, yes, you'd naturally pick up friends. And actually so Casey became more active with Twitter. He began using it as an experiment to kind of see what kind of things would garner more followers, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it was very successful, and he's blown past me in the number of followers significantly.
Yeah, I remember you guys having a healthy competition about that back in the day, and talking about it on the podcast.
Well, that's going back away. Thanks. I think it was a certain squid photograph in Noto town. Do you remember the giant squid during the COVID era? And Casey took a photo by that, and I think that launched him in Twitter. I'm not bitter about it. I'm slightly bitter about it. But anyway, to answer your question, and I'm sorry that I do bang on quite a lot. I apologize for that.
No problem.
But yeah, I think through the podcast initially, and we used to have guests on quite regularly, and the guests were almost exclusively people we'd met on Twitter,
Yeah.
and people we liked, people we thought were interesting, we wanted to talk to, and we would invite them on, and 9 times out of 10 they wanted to come and speak to us. So that's how we made most of our friends. The Japan by River Cruise guys, Bobby Judo and Ollie Horn, and the Combini Boys, were a couple of our. We went on their podcast, and there was some reciprocal podcasting. Sakamichi Brewing guys,
Yeah.
Matthew Boynton,
Yeah.
of course, Brian. I could go on. There's so many interesting people that we've talked to.
Yeah, that was the thing with what I found myself too. I mean, I started, I think it was back in 2010 is when I got onto Twitter, and I was really involved in the J vlogging community. It wasn't called J vlogging then. We were just Japan content creators. But it was like, it was YouTube. And at that point, there really wasn't any kind of Japan podcasting thing happening. But I remember being actually invited to go to the Google headquarters with a bunch of Gaijin creators. And we were all invited to the partnership program back in the day when Google had to invite you to make money on YouTube. And there was a big crew of us who showed up there. And I remember being in a table. There was like a workshop about marketing our channels. And I was sitting beside Hiko Simon. And he was on his laptop, and he was like on Twitter, and I was like, what is that you're doing there? What's that you're doing there, eh? And in my Canadian accent, he was like, that's Twitter. And then we started talking, and then I pulled up my phone and I made my first Twitter account right there. And
Nice.
I think Hiko might have been one of the first ones I followed, and then other people, and then it kind of went on from there. And then later when I started podcasting, the Just Japan podcast, which like this one, which was back in 2013, I think exclusively all of my guests were found through Twitter. And I just sit there and I just like my research. I'd be scrolling through, just looking for people, and searching people out and coming across people. And if it was someone like Mai Tu Yen, if it was like Brian in Fukuoka, I would actually check then who is he following, and I'd look through his followers, and if I saw something interesting, I'd follow them, and just like I'd basically kind of cold call people. I think back in those days too, they didn't necessarily have to be following you for you to be able to send them a DM. I think you could send anyone a DM. So I just DM people and say, hey, I'm a podcaster. I got this Japan podcast. You want to come on? And like you said, 9 times out of 10, they were usually pretty keen.
Yeah, there's a couple of people we've had to persuade to come on, who did, and I won't tell you who they are because they probably don't want to,
I've had that too, though. I've had that too.
exposed
I've had some people who are kind of like, how many people listen to your show? In the early days. Now, eventually, the Just Japan podcast, before I went on hiatus for about 5 years and have just brought it back last year. But it grew to the point where I did have a substantial listenership. But in the beginning, no, we all start off small, and but some people were like,
of us continue small.
well, maybe you'll get a few more listeners out of this. I can't guarantee that.
Yeah.
But all of you listening, subscribe to Ishikawa Summer to See. Links will be in the show notes.
Thank you.
And they'll be all over my social medias. But it's so you're in Twitter that way. But then so you've been on it for quite some time, and
Yeah.
you're not a green person. You're not a newbie.
No. I'm an old head when it comes to Twitter, but I'm the same as you. I try to choose carefully who I follow. I do a kind of similar thing, and I check and I see, is Paprika Girl following this person? And I always feel if Paprika Girl is following this person, they're probably decent.
Yes, Ricky is a very good litmus test for it just is, if she thinks that person's okay, then they're okay.
Then they're okay, yeah. So I do a little Paprika Girl test, and okay, they're probably decent. And I really enjoy being on Gaijin Twitter or Twitter in general. There's a lot of crossover with football, of course, because there's quite a few Newcastle United fans here who are also, on Twitter. So we get a bit of a crossover, a nice little extra sort of community there as well. It is a minefield, of course, because there are some questionable characters out there as well. But as a it's going to sound really I don't know. It's going to sound something, but as a psychology graduate and a communication graduate, I I kind of I can understand that people have different motivations for joining social media, and there are people who may appear to be one way, but in reality are a different way,
Yeah.
and that can go either way. Of course, Mr. Bean as an example, horrible, horrible individual. Ugh, just messy. I'm joking. I'm joking. But but so you can kind of you can take the positives from the people that you meet on Twitter, even if not everything they say is positive. If you see what I'm trying to get at. I think some things are a cry for help. Some things are a badly kind of constructed criticism that is misinterpreted, or I don't know. There's I just try to see the good in everyone, is what I'm saying.
Nice. A good way to put it. No, there's absolutely. I think if there's one thing, like I've been producing YouTube content since 2006, and I was one of those kind of early OG YouTube content creators in Japan back in the day, and I've been podcasting for a long time. If there's one thing that doing this for a long time, you grow a very thick skin. And like I could give a crap what anyone says, but these days I don't get as much love air quotes as I used to. I think Kurt Bell said it back in the day, or just on the last episode or a few episodes ago on the podcast, and we were talking about Gaijin Ato-san, on Twitter, and I'm a huge fan of his. I love the stuff he does, and he's been saying that from time to time the trolls really get him down, but Kurt and I kind of look at that as a feather in the cap. When the trolls start to come after you, that means you're noticed. You've arrived.
Yep. Yeah.
That you've arrived in a place where people notice you, and although there's a few of those people out there, if you're at that point, there's a lot more of the good people out there who are following you and caring about you. And I think like those who enjoy what you do, and I know that you probably have those interactions with people, and say, for example, that other guy, Casey, with his podcast, you guys have a very loyal following, and you're, the people do. I see that on Twitter. People are really interested and invested in what you guys do. And,
well, even if it was just two people. It is a few more than two, luckily. But even if it was only two people who were interested, I would continue doing it, because it's nice that anybody is even remotely interested in what I have to say. So I'm very grateful to all those people who do tune in and listen and interact with me on Twitter, either as Ishikawa Summit to See or my embarrassing @Kumayama100 handle that I regret massively but can't change. I'm happy when I get any kind of positive feedback or just interaction with people.
Well, I mean, hey, I love those the rice field in the morning commute pictures. I loved the saga of you sharing was it the little tree or the tree growing out.
Oh, little buddy.
The branch growing out of the tree, and then that whole I'm like, this is awesome. I love watching this. And then poor Buddy poor Buddy. Someone broke him off. Is that what happened?
He got chopped off. He got chopped off in his prime.
Bugger.
But it's all right because he regrew. He's a strong lad.
A strong lad, Buddy. Well, you know what? On that note, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know it's like almost 9:30 where you are, and I have to admit that I turned into a pumpkin pretty early. It's a holiday here.
Same.
I'm coming to you from Malaysia, and it's what is it? Eid al Mubarak today. So didn't have to work today, but I'm back at it tomorrow, and just have 2 weeks left. Not even quite 2 weeks. 2 weeks exactly before my summer break happens, and then I'll be podcasting maybe weekly. Because
great.
Yeah. For a while until the school year begins again, and then I'll be like, So I'm wondering, for all of the fine folks out there, the Just Japan podcast listeners, where can they, and all those who are watching this on YouTube as well, and that has been requested of me to post these on YouTube. There's been some people who just say, I listen to all my content on YouTube, and I take everything in on YouTube, and that's cool. So where can people find you on the social medias, and where can they find your podcast? And I will share all the show notes.
Well, you can find me personally on Twitter, and I always have to look this up in case I read it out wrong. I'm at Kumayama100, which was a terrible nickname that I gave myself. Yeah, back when I was living in Kushiro when I first came here. So, it's embarrassing, but there you go. And you can follow Ishikawa Summit to Sea at I Summit to Sea. Nice. And that's TO, not the number 2, Summit to Sea.
Okay.
Quite an awkward one to type in, but there you go. That's that one. Also, my Facebook, I keep it kind of private. That's just purely friends and family, so I'm not going to share that one.
Don't share it. Yes, exactly.
On Instagram, I don't want you to follow me, but if you're watching on YouTube, you might notice there's a painting behind me on the wall.
Okay, yeah. It's a painting.
And this is my dad's painting. My dad's an artist.
Oh wow. Okay, cool.
And so I always try and direct people to his art because it's really good. And so if you could find him on Instagram, he is John_Fowler. That's FOWLER_art. And he very rarely updates his Instagram because he's nearly 80. But he's put quite a lot on there, and you can find a sort of catalogue of some of his paintings and his exhibitions. And I realized that the majority of people listening to this are probably in Asia or the American continent. But if you are in Great Britain, please do try to go up north and visit one of my dad's exhibitions.
Nice.
Yes,
I'm now following him, and I see that I see that Brian in Fukuoka is also following him too.
Yeah, some people have discerning taste and quality. And so, I would like you to go and follow him because I know it would make him happy to suddenly get a boost if he even realizes. So that's it. Really.
Yeah, fantastic. And then your podcast is all over the place. Your podcast is on Apple Podcasts and
everywhere. Yep.
Everywhere you find podcasts.
Also, the J-Pops podcast. We're in a little bit of a hiatus. Justin from the J-Pops is actually having another baby. What day is it today? What's the date? Is it the 17th today?
It's in 2 days. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
In 2 days, they're having their baby. They know exactly when it's coming. And Mark, the other J-Pop, currently has 2 children. And you know what? Having small children and podcasting isn't easy to schedule with 3 people.
No, it's not. No, it's hard enough when it's just your house and
exactly.
The people you're interviewing don't have. No, that's just impossible. I think it doesn't make sense even mathematically at all.
No, but their back catalogue, if you can find it in all the same places. Before I joined, it was way more interesting than after I joined. And if you are thinking of having a baby in Japan, or if you have a young baby in Japan, I really recommend listening to those episodes because it follows their journey. So it's very, very interesting.
The J-Pops podcast. Yeah. So guys, go subscribe to Ishikawa Summit to Sea and the J-Pops podcast. Links will be in the show notes. I'll also share those on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/justjapanstuff. And I'll share that on my Twitter. And again, it'll be in the show notes. So guys, when you're listening to the podcast, or even if you're watching on YouTube, look down below and you'll see all the text there. All the links will be there that we're talking about. And you go follow Joseph on all those places. And again, follow his father's Instagram as well. So, So thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, Thank you so much for responding to my very plaintive and sort of embarrassing plea on, and thank you for listening, and thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I want to thank Joe for coming on the Just Japan podcast for episode 220. That was a fantastic conversation. He is such a great guy. Go over and subscribe, follow Ishikawa Summit to See wherever you listen to podcasts. There will be some links below in the show notes. And under this video, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm posting this whole thing on YouTube. I'm even recording the intro and outro bits to share with you on YouTube, because I do realize that some of you really enjoy listening to your content, consuming your content on YouTube. So go check that out. It's a full-on video podcast for this episode. Links are below in the doobly-doo on YouTube, just like they are with the show notes of the podcast itself. So go follow him there, and go follow him on Twitter as well at Kumiyama100. The links will be below. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this episode. Now, just to let you know, will be recording this podcast with a bit more regularity over the summer break. I have about a week left of school, a week and a few days left of school, and then I'll be on summer holiday, and then I'll have a bit more time to record. I've been chatting with some very fascinating people behind the scenes and trying to line them up as guests on the podcast. So, it's going to be some pretty cool and exciting things. A lot of great feedback about the podcast episode with Danny and Evan Benton of the Benton Homestead, and it's been really fantastic. Over on the Facebook page, like I mentioned, facebook.com/justjapanstuff, I've been posting some updates on them, and they've got their first batch of honey out there they're selling, which is very cool to see, especially since these are kind of similar goals I'm aspiring to in the future. It's neat to see that. Again, I will be coming up on summer vacation very soon. I'm looking forward to that. As you can see, if you're watching the video podcast, I've got some raccoon-like eyes. Been suffering from some insomnia lately, which is something very new to me. I'm someone who sleeps like a champ. I love sleep. I sleep very well. I consider myself very skilled at sleeping. But in the last few months, it's not been coming so easily. So that's been, of course, a bit of a pain. I go to bed every night pretty darn early, but I just lay there staring at the ceiling for hours. So hopefully with the school year finished, I can decompress. But there are some big changes coming this way, and I'll be very honest. We're going to be here next year in Malaysia, but it'll only be next year. And after that, we plan on moving on to another country. Our time here has been good, but there are more opportunities professionally outside of Malaysia. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm not sleeping as well as I could in the past. I've been looking into those and chatting with people, and there will be a move, not this summer, but the following summer to a new country. And I will fill you in with more details when I have some. Right now, I don't have any because I don't know. It's actually not the hiring season for what I do. After the summer break, I'll be full on chatting with people at schools in some different places, and we'll see where that takes us as a family. When I say we, I don't mean the royal we. I literally mean my wife and my kids. Yeah, so, and that's something we all know we're all talking about, and that's kind of something that's going to be very necessary for us in the future to live that dream and own a nice house in Japan, and for me to have honeybees and things like that. All those important things we need in life. Houses and honeybees. So this summer we'll be here in Penang, Malaysia for the summer, and I've got some big projects coming up. I'm going to be, hanging out with the family, of course, but I've got some writing projects that are coming up, some very exciting writing projects. I've got a children's book I'm working on right now about a beetle. Adventures of a Beetle, based on a real-life escape artist beetle named Gary Houdini, who we had in Shenzhen, China. A lot of great stories. And my daughter will be helping me with that as the illustrator for the book. And we'll be self-publishing. We'll see where that goes. Also planning on writing something a little bit more serious, a little more kind of professional, educational about gardening and children, because I'm a big gardening weenie. And if you follow me on the social medias, you will know that very much so, especially if you follow me on Twitter at MadForMaple. That's it for this episode, everyone. Go follow Joseph Fowler, Joe, over on his socials and follow his podcast. And of course, if you're watching this on YouTube and you don't already subscribe to the Just Japan podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or Amazon Music, go and do so. The links are right below. Follow me on social media, especially over the summer. I'll be sharing lots of fun things. My last day of school is on July 3rd. I'm very much excited about that. Again, I do look a bit of a raccoon right now, and I'm looking forward to getting some sleep, some rest, and and all of that stuff. So that's it for this episode of the Just Japan podcast, everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea. I'm a Canadian expat who is now year 22 in Asia. Oh my goodness, where does the time go? So it's been a ride, folks. I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank you all for being so awesome. And I want to thank you for leaving a rating and a review wherever you listen to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. These calls to action are important. And let people know about this podcast. It's great to be back. And I will hopefully, the podcast will be more regular in the near future. That's not an issue I'm dealing with right now, but we won't go into too many more details. It's a sleep I'm dealing with. That's a problem. But yeah, the podcast will be coming out with some more frequent episodes. When I say we, I suppose in that case, I mean me. All right, guys. Well, that's it. Thank you so much. And wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. And I'll be talking to you real soon.